We want to just finish off a couple nakudas in this sugya. in Kuchaf Beis Amud Aleph. See the second part of the sugya, that after the Brisa brought a halacha that a goy that's liked asavim for himself and a Yisrael can have it afterwards, but in Makiro Aser, we have a Gzera by Makiro, that because Makiro, if he knows him, he's friendly with him, he knows him, then, I didn't say friendly, it just says he knows him, he recognizes him, he knows him, so then that's Aser. So the Gemara says, Amar Mar, Medvar Memoriam Shein Makiro, Ava Makiro Aser. If the Brisa says that Makiro is Aser, Haba Gamliel Makiro Habe. If this captain who built the platform to get off of the ship was traveling with Rabbi Gamliel, Rashi says he for sure knows who he is. He's makir him. Rabbi Gamliel was the Nasi Yisrael, and he knows him. He's chashuv and everything. So how is it mutar for Rabbi Gamliel to go down this kevish if the one who built it was makiroi? Amar Abaye shelo b'fanav havna. So Abaye has a chiddush that shelo b'fanav, that you could learn Abaye two ways. You could learn that shelo b'fanav, there's, if it's b'fanav, maybe there's maybe Taki did it for himself, but if it's b'fanav, then there's marasayan. It looks like he did it for whoever was b'fanav. So it should be also out marasayan. Rashi comes to lafuke that. Rashi says, Shlo b'fanav have kishaso lo hayran gamliel sham din nechaven lei. So we see from Rashi that it's not a sfor of marasayan, it's a sfor of kavana. That if he's b'fanav, then we consider it that he did it for the kavana, for the Shem Yisrael, for the sake of the Yisrael. That's the sfor of Abaye, the nechaven lei. We'll see it afterwards in Tosfos, another Nekuda in this, but that's the sfor of Abaye. Rashi comes to tell us it's not a sfor of marasayan or anything like that. It's that the Isser is, if the goy does it for the sake of the Israel, it's mechaven for that. And Shalom B'fanav, he's not there. We assume there's no kavanah. Clear Shaila based on that if you know he was mechaven for the Israel, even Shalom B'fanav should be Asar. So it comes out according to Rashi, the way Rashi learns, the fanav is not. It's not it's not a paraduma, whatever you need b'fanav is that dafka that it's a svara. So if it's svara of nechaben lei, so there should be two chiddushim out of Rashi. Number one, it should be that if he is mechaben for him, even a shlo b'fanav l'chor should be also if he knows he's mechaben for him. And also for carrot, let's say if you know, even if it's b'fanav, you know it was not mechaben for the Jew. You have some kind of idea for some reason. You know the goy did it totally for himself, even though the Jew is right there. Let's say, for example, he doesn't know that the Jew needs it. The goy does malacha. Let's say he was liket asavim, and he has no idea that there's a Jew that's there, but he has no idea this Jew has a para that even needs asavim. So he's b'fanav, but there's no need. So that there would be no isra even for the baya, even b'fanav, when it's not mechaven lei. Just if he knows, if he's a makira, he knows him, and he knows. And there's actually a Magen Avram that says this, but there's we'll see how it's not so pasha, but from the later Gemara, the Magen Avram Taka says that if he was mechaven for him, even the shlo b'fanav, then it's still asar. And for carrot also, if he is b'fanav and he doesn't know, then the Jew needs it, should be mutter. So it's not a dry din of b'fanav, it's just like the stam. The stam situation is, if he knows him and he knows the other power, then we say b'fanav is b'chaven, not. So, but this both study with the Magen Avram make a lot of sense the way Rashi says. Look at l'fanav do nechaven lei. It's totally in whether he has kavanah or not, like Rashi is telling us. So that's a vaya. Rava Amar afilu tema b'fanav. Even if it was b'fanav, and even let's say Lu Yitzur, you could say mechaven lei, that there is some kavanah for him. It's still near le'echa, near le'meya. Since he didn't have to do anything extra for the Jew, near le'echa, near le'meya, just like one candle is enough for many, so also one kevish is enough for everybody to be yored from the sfina. So there's no issue, there's no problem because now, so what if it's Ner L'Chad L'Meah? So far, Sophie's Mechaber for the Jew. So we're going to have to say that Iker Kavana was for himself. We assume that if it's Ner L'Chad L'Meah and he did it, he was going to be Nena himself. So then the assumption is that the Iker Kavana was really for himself. And here will be a raya that we go after the Iker Kavana. We don't look at what happens to be tuffle to it. As we'll see later on by the Maisa of Shmuel. So these are the two studim, Abaya and Rava. Now we can Clara Shaila over here. Is Abaya masking to Rava, and is Rava masking to Abaya? And there's Abaya says Shalom Afanav. Does that mean that he's cholik on this four of Ner L'Echad Ner L'Meah? It would seem to be so, because the case is a case of Ner L'Echad Ner L'Meah over here. There's no room to say not that way. Kevish is a classic case of Ner L'Echad Ner L'Meah. Rashi already said previously. Rashi said in the Gemara that said before, Smicha, after the Mishnah, Diashmina Ner Mishum de Ner L'Echad Ner L'Meah. Al Mayan Ligzor Dilma Asal Fushay. What about Kevish? So what do you need Kevish for? Kevish, we already know everything. Maisa didn't come a little skin kamashmalan. It's just telling you a Maisa Shahayab. And Rashi says, over there, Kevish Lamali, Hadumya de Nerhu, Kevish Lechad, Kevish Lamea. So it's Pashat. Rashi says it's Pashat for the Gemara when it says B'tzricha, that we know that Kevish is Ner Lechad Ner Lamea. That's not a Chiddush. So Abaya knows that. There's nobody that's cholik on that Yisod. And if Abaya still has to say Shalom Afanov, so it would seem like Abaya's cholik legamri on Rava's Yisod. So, and then we ask the question for Keret. If Abaya's cholik on Rava, is Rava cholik on Abaya? Meaning that when Rava says words afilu tema b'fanav, even if it would be before him, still Ner L'Echad Ner L'Meah. So maybe Rava is being called Legamri on Abaya and saying that it makes no difference whether it's b'fanav or not. Or you could say from the words of Filu Tema, it's a little more mashma that Rava is masking to Abaya. He's saying, in a chanami, really, I'm asking. If you say Shalom b'fanav, that takes away the problem. But I'm just adding that even b'fanav, there's a way out of it because of this four of Ner L'Echad Ner L'Meah. Going under the assumption that Abaya is cholik on this four, and Rava is being machadif that four over here. So this is a major question in the sugya: is are they talking to each other or not? Are they agreeing to each other and they're just adding different yisodos, or are they totally b'cholik on each other? And it'd be tremendous nachminas ladina because, as we know, that machlokas Abaya v'Rava throughout Shas, except for Yaakov Gam, halacha karava against Abaya. So there's tremendous nafkaminas l'halacha if Rava is maskim or cholik on Abaya. If he's maskim to Abaya, then there is a heter of Shalom Afanov. But if he's cholik on Abaya, and so in a case of makiro, and it's not Ner L'Echad Ner L'Meah, such as likut asavim or mayim or whatever, that there's a possibility that he was marbe b'shvilo, if he's makiro, so then according to Rava, there will be no heter of Shalom Afanov. It'll all be totally on one thing, and one thing only, whether it's makira or not. But if he's cholik on Abaya, then whether it's b'fanav or not really makes no difference. So that's a tremendous nachmina halacha, which we'll see. Now on the first nakuda, whether Abaya is cholik on Rava, so Tosfos says a chiddush over here, the last Tosfos, that he wants to say that Abaya is really moted to Rava to Ner L'Echad Ner L'Meah, and this is a special case. Over here, you wouldn't say Ner L'Echad Ner L'Meah. For Kira, you would say that since Rav Gamliel was here, and he was the Sar of a Rosh, he was a Nasi, and a Sar, he was considered like a prince. He was a political leader of Klal Yisrael. So you could say that maybe the Iker Kavana, in this case, it's not Stam Akiro, but here maybe the Iker Kavana of the Goy would be for Rav Gamliel, and he himself would be really secondary. That would be an exception to the rule, to the general rule. But Tosfos is a chiddush. There's a ritzvah over here. It's not so simple. That's going to be the shot. But again, it's not so negel Maisa whether Abaya is cholik on Rava or not, because the psak is like Rava anyway. So the Gemara goes on. says Meisvei. So there's a lashon of Bryce that he has that we can go down. It was Shalom B'Fanenu, which is in before Raya to Abaya. So Emahoel v'Aso Nerid Boy. So he has a different gear. So maybe the Dagesh is even if that you're Goris that, but if the point is not that it was B'Fanenu or not, it's just the fact that he did it. He gets around this Bryce. Toshma. This is very important. Irshu Yisrael v'Nochem Darim v'Socha. Vaisava Merchatz and Marchetzes b'Shabbos. So we have a city of Goyim and Jews together, and they're lighting up on Shabbos the Merchatz for after Shabbos. Imrov Nochem Mutter. Yorchatz V'Miyad. Imrov Yisrael Yamtim v'Teshi Chamuchamin. So Rashi learns that the kasha over here is bein the abaya, bein the rabba. It's not a raya to it's either or. Rashi says that the sfora, like we spoke out, or the last year in Bechteshi Chamuchamin, the sfora that is Shaloyana b'Masha Yigdim l'Hecham Shabbos, the Rashi sfora of Hana. We're not going to go into that again right now. But Rashi explains the kasha of the Gemara. Over here, it is a sfora of Ner L'Mea, which that's already a kasha on Rava. Why is there a problem over here if Ner L'Echa Ner L'Mea? One chimum works for everybody. One heating up of the you don't specifically heat it for this one or that one. One heating works for all. And still, Ktani in Rov Yisrael, David Dumi the Makiroi. Rov Yisrael, Rashi says, what it accomplishes is that it makes it like Makiroi. In other words, you're doing it for them. You're doing it for their sake right now. So Makiro turns it into a for their sake, which that's what Makiro does as well. The Masika Daite Lasus Apishil Avagav to Shlobo Fanav. It's still going to be also, even though it's Shlobo Fanav. So we have a case over here of Lo Makiro, of Makiro, yes, Makiro. And there's a swear of Ner Lecha Ner Lamea, which we're saying is a problem anyway. And it's also Shlobo Fanav. There's nobody there at the Shah that they're heating this up. There's no Jews walking around in the merchatz when they're heating it up. They're going to come later on. So it's Shalom B'Fanov. But Kasha Bein L'Abaya Bein L'Rava. So the Gemara says a very sodistic answer. Hasu ki mechami adaita deruba mechamami. We go after the robe, and Rashi says the ikar chilul Shabbos b'shvilam. We go after the ikar chilul Shabbos. Ikar ma'isa that's done. We don't look at tuffle. We look at the ikar. So we don't say that the tuffle's there and we can't ignore them. We look at the ikar ma'isa, and ikar is done for the sake of the goyim. If it's rov akum. Avol nachri b'Yisrael, mashein can if it's just a nachri in Yisrael. The nachri that then shehu David shari la'abaya shalom b'fanav l'rava afilu b'fanav. If the goy does it for himself, and now the question is, like over there, this will be important for the second part of this year later on. And by the case of the merchatz, it's not the users of the merchatz that are heating it up. It's the balanim. It's the workers over there that they're heating it up for the sake of others, not for themselves. So if it's for yourself, l'chora, then that becomes the ikar automatically. Whoever does it for themselves, and we ignore the fact that there might be somebody else around. Or we say that it's shalom b'fanav, it's mutar, etc. Mashen can. So the case of the merchatz is that there's somebody else, a third party, that's mechamim for the sake of two other parties, Yisrael and Akum. Now, the milah depends on who's the rov to answer the shaila, what's the ikar? Which we'll see more about that in a minute. Okay, now we have another shaila, Tashma. Nera Dolak v'Mesiba. Okay, they light let's say a bonfire for a party. In Rov Nochei B'Tor L'Shtamish L'Eira. In Rov Yisrael also Mechza Asar. So here also L'Chora B'Pashtis, we're going after the Rov, and Rashi says over here it's also Dumdi de Makiro, Hol V'Rubeninu, Asagadaite L'Hadlik Af B'Shvilam Tanya Asar. So again, the Chora over here, it seems to be Rashi doesn't spell out clearly who it's a kasha on. It would seem to be a kasha on Abaya. because over here it's a case of Makiro, and it's all probably again Shalom Bafanav because they probably lit the bonfire before anybody else got there for this Masiva. Before Rashi explained that it was a kasha on both, Rashi didn't explain who the kasha is on over here. It seems to be that we're asking Abaya, and the Gemara answers, also Nami, Ki Madlaki, Adaita, the Ruba Madlaki. And even Abaya that says that in fun of, that's only, like Rashi said before, that's only when the Goy did it for himself, and now there's somebody else shows up. So the Iker is really for himself, and the question is, was Mechavan really for the Israel as well? Sunday can be marbe or not. Mashenkin over here, if the Iker Kavanah is for the Yidden, if they're the Rove, then Abaya's maskim that even though it's Shalom B'fanav, it's still going to be Asr. Then we end off with this last Maisa, Shmuel Ikla Be'avin Torin. Shmuel visited this place, and also who Nachri Adak Shraga. So it was dark there, and a guy came and lit a fire. Adrin and Shmuel Ape turned around. He didn't want to be nended from it. Came in the chazal the icy star. Rekari Amar Data Navsheu Dadik. Adrin Uul Ape the Gabi Shraga. So when the guy came along, and first he thought the guy lit it just for the people in the room. So Shmuel didn't want to be nended from it. Then when he saw that he read for a star from it himself, I realized that he did it for himself really. And now so then the Iker is really himself. That's the Iker, and the fact that it might have even Rove Yidden over there doesn't matter, because we always say that the for yourself trumps anything else, trumps even a Rove, if because we say the Iker of Maisa is going to be for himself. So Rashi really spells it out. Hilkach Yisrael Iker. I'm sorry, that was before. Daite the Ruba. Mexa Nami Lekala make him along the mill. So the Iker Memar Iker Daite the Malach Mishal Yisrael. When it's half and half, the Gemara said it's Asr, because Rashi learns that it's a suffix. We'll see the post can bring down from the Smag that it's considered a Vadai. Rashi says that it's Asr mitzad suffix, maybe for the Jew, maybe for the Goy. And we'll see it's going to be a nafkamina that since Rashi learns that it's a suffix, it'll be a nafkamina the Gabe the Isra b'chtei shiyasu after Shabbos, which we'll see in a little bit. Avol nachri b'Yisrael. So Rashi touches up now the last mice of the Gemara, that when he's madlik la'atzmoi, we say he's vada the ikr. Vada and avada, you say that whoever does it for himself, he becomes the ikr. The ikr mice is for himself. People do things for themselves, especially these goyim, they're not doing it for the yid, and even though they have including them, for sure he's the ikr, and we go after the ikr. So since it's a case of Ner Echad Ner Lamea, then it's mutter, because we're not concerned that he was lafushe the Yisrael. As we saw svors earlier in the sugya that if he was lafushe the Yisrael, that's still going to be usher, even though he did it for himself. Even though he is part of that, which we really need to understand that better. That if we go after the svor of Iker, so then all the svors of the Gemara in the beginning of the sugya that we spoke about lafushe, dilma asa lafushe, b'shul Yisrael, like in the very beginning of the tzricha, right? Or after the Mishnah, it says the tzricha, diashmin and near Mishnah near Echa near Lamea. Amamayim ligzar dilma asa lafushe b'shul Yisrael. So we see from that Gemara lafushe b'shul Yisrael. If he adds on a little more for the Yisrael, and then he carries it out, the whole thing in the Shus Rabin, then that's talking going to be Yasser. Why should it be Yasser? If we're going after the Iker Maisa, so the fact that he's like Marba B'Shuir and a little bit more for the Yisrael, so why should there be a reason? Why is that a problem? So what if he added for the Yisrael? The Maisa Sof the Iker was still for the Goy. We see time and time again through the whole end of the sugya that we always go after the Iker Maisa. But you look back in the beginning of the sugya, and we have a few times this svara. Like Rashi said in the beginning, the very first Rashi in the Gemara, near le'echad near le'mea, came into Nerchel that tzarcho hidlik lika le'meimar the b'shvil Yisrael afish. When there's a svor of near le'echad le'mea, and he did it for himself, then you can't say that he added on anything for the Yisrael, because it's near le'echad near le'mea. Mashma, if he did add something on for the Yisrael, it would be Yasser. Even though we're learning over here now that everything goes after the Ikra Maisa. And Tosus learned that the whole, also part of the whole Gzera, to begin with, the whole Gzera B'chlal, was you might ask a goy to do more. If his goy is already doing Amaisa, then he might do more for the Yisrael. Tosus learned that also. There's another riot from Tosus. Okay, we'll speak more about that. The Tosus said in the long Tosus, Mashka Achrov, in the first very wide line, he says, "Ri Omer Dehuadin li Yisrael Atzma Aser." It's also Aser for the Yisrael himself, even though he could have gone and taken it out himself. And that the word matir, they would say behemto, is to say that we're not gozer dilma, we're not gozer. He might come to lafusha mishra to add on a little more for the Yisrael. That's the whole ruach of the gzera before, and the whole first part of the sugya is all about shema. He'll be marbe v'shilo, which that itself, like it's a sure idea. Like we're worried about the ribui shiurim of a goy, even though by Yisrael we know that it's an issur to be marbe shiurim, like on Yom Tov. If you could cook a certain amount in your marbe shiurim, that could be usher. Fine, that's why derises, but we're mamish usher. It's mamish usher. Here the whole thing is xeras. So it's very interesting that we're all worried about a ribui shiurim of a goy for a Yisrael. If we're worried about that, why are we worried about it? It's sof kol sof, the ikra ma'isa is being done for the sake of the Yisrael, of the goy himself. So that is marba a little bit more for the Yisrael. Why does that make it usher? Well, so Bal Korchach, you see, we understand the kasha? Yeah, we understand the problem? So before we get back to Abaye Rabba, I just want to say that the you see clear that that the only time that we look at the Ikar Maisa, this Yisod of Ikar Maisa only goes when there's nothing extra being done specifically for the sake of the Yisrael. Meaning only in cases like the situation of, let's say, Ner Lecha, Ner Lemea, when there only is one Maisa to be done. So in that case, since there is only one Maisa and there only could be one Maisa, there is nothing more to be adding on. So then we look at the Ikar Maisa. Then we say that it goes by the Ikar. We see this Yisod in the Ran. The Ran speaks out. And let's see if we can find it here. Yeah, the riff on Mem Vavam and Beis and the riff, he brings down a Gemara and a Vodazora. At the end of our sugya, so the riff ends off our sugya by bringing a Gemara and Vodazora that says, brings a brisa, Shema Gamalei Omer, Lo Yaskir Odam Merchatzoi LeNachri Bnei Shenikres Al Shmo. But Nachri is a Osabo Malacha B'Shabbos Yom Tovim. That you shouldn't rent out your merchatz to a goy because everybody knows it's a Jewish merchatz and he's going to cook. He's going to heat up the water Shabbos Yom Tov. So that's Marasayan. That's Marasayan. I will say Deu LeNachri Shari. Amri Arisuse Gudu Kavid. But Masha'inkin, to be masker your sadeh to a goy, that you're allowed to do, because it was a common thing to have an aris. An aris, the sharecropper, the people commonly, just like you're for sure allowed to rent out your house or a property to a goy to do whatever he wants to in it. Who didn't you allowed? Because people always rent out houses to people. The goys does malacha. Doesn't look like it's for the Jew. So in those days, it was a very common practice to rent out your field to a sharecropper, an aris, and all the malacha that he does in that field, the goy is doing for his own sake. So the Ran says over there different asked Miha and Mibam and Beis. Miha Shaminan, the Kevin Shieshla Nachri, Chelik the Paris Asada. Since the guy has a chelik in the Paris that he's going to be growing in that Sada, Alabish Yisrael Nene b'malachas Shabbos, even though the Jew is going to get a percentage. That's the way they work. You got next to Shlish Ravia, you give the guy the field to work. You don't necessarily rent the field, but the rental is paid by a percentage of the fruits or vegetables that he grows. So that's how he paid the rent. You get a certain percentage there. So it comes out that the Jew is going to be nene from Melecha Shabbos because the guy is doing it and he's giving him a portion to the Jew. So he says, doesn't matter, mutter. The Nachri adaited in Ashekavid. He's doing it for his own sake. But now Israel, Mela Asya. The now the Jew, Mela comes out. Meaning there's nothing specific that the guy did for the Israel. He did it all for himself. Whatever Hana there will become out Mamela. So when something on B'chiyah Gavna, when the entire malacha was done for the sake of the goy for the Nashe, that's when we say a heter. That's when the Hana of Yisrael is completely mamela. Masha'en ken, going back to our sugya, that if he's lafushebe, if he's marba b'shulo, he adds on for him. It comes out that there is a certain percentage of what the goy is doing that's being done for the sake of the Israel. When you get to that matzav of anything done at all for the sake of the Israel, then we lost our heter. We lost the swore of ikr. Ikr means ikr of one maisa. But besides the goy's maisa for himself, he adds on something for the Jew. So you can no longer say that there's the swore of ikr falls off because there's a chelik that's being done specifically for the sake of the Jew. So
in the last year,
when are we going to say ikr? When do we have the swore of ikr? That's going to be when all there is. Maybe that comes back to the swore of here that, like Rashi keeps on being madgish. That when is there a swore of ikr? That's only going to be in the case of ner le'echad ner le'meah, where there is nothing more to be added on for the Jew. But if it's makiro and it's like likut asavim or bringing water or whatever, even though in this particular case it might be that he didn't bring anything extra for the Jew, but since it's makiro and he knows the Jew needs to water his animals or water himself or whatever, or he needs the asavim, so he might not have added on right now, but since it's common that he could add on for the Jew, so then they asked such a ma'aseh by Makiro. They made one getter to answer the whole thing.
Last year, didn't we say that?
I think you're muted.
Oh.
Try to unmute you.
Am I still muted?
Here, now you can unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Not hearing you. Sorry, I'm not hearing anything. Let's see if I can do something here. Oh. Now try. See. I might have had a problem with my speaker. I think I'm on now. You want to try? Just stay testing. No. So what is it here? Let's see. Anybody else try to talk? I don't know if it's Yitz or it's just my. Nothing. Okay, I don't know what to do with this. I'm a little bit technologically challenged. You hear me though. You could probably message me. Did you message me? Oh, it doesn't let me unmute. You want to just send a message? You have a question? It's clicked by me that participant can chat with everyone publicly. So on paper, everything's right, but long question after I can ask. Okay. Okay, so I want to hear that question. Anybody has any idea what?
Can you hear me now? Can Rebbe hear me now?
Okay, yes.
Okay, so it's signed on a different one. I can sign on later in a second. The question was, last year, didn't we say that if it was for work, that it would be mutter, the shaila of the door in the hotel, that if he's doing it for work, then we don't look at anything else. Seemingly, even if he would be doing it for the Yisrael, as long as he's doing it for work, that would be enough of a reason to say that it's a daita denafshe, even if there is a tzad that he's doing it for the Yisrael, but it's also within the realm of his work.
It is possible. I mean, it sort of depends on the situation. Like that gets into a shaila which we'll see later on. It's a little early in Sugi for that, but there is such a svara that the goy might be doing it for, not for the Yisrael, but for his boss. Meaning that, like, that's just his job. Like, say, like a mail carrier, or an Amazon delivery. So there is a svara, a certain postgame that the Amazon delivery guy is not doing anything for anybody he's delivering it for. He's doing it for his job. He's doing it because his boss said go deliver this stuff. So he's doing it for the boss, not for the receiver of the delivery. There is a svara like that, and there's also a svara of amira la amira, that if you hire a company and then the company sends a certain guy, so then you didn't ask that worker to come, you just spoke to the company sent the worker. So there's a svara of Sam Sofer, which we'll see again later on in future sugyas of amira la amira. It's like one amira one step away. So, but over here, I don't think we're talking about those kind of situations. We have we're talking direct over here. Looks like direct, and that also does. We don't necessarily see anybody over here as having a job per se. It's just a guy that's doing something for you. So we don't have any jobs yet. The closest thing we've seen to a job so far has been the svara in the Rishonim and Kuchaf Aleph, that they learned that Rashi there, and Rashi we saw in Kedushin, when we said that when you put out the fire, that he hopes to get paid for it. He was going to get paid for it. Then we saw Taka, that also made it a daita denafshe. So that's the closest thing we've seen yet so far to a job, which, like you're saying in Hanami, that could sometimes be a heter. But the case over here doesn't seem to be that. We're not talking over here. There's no daita denafshe. It's just a goy, just a random goy that's doing a maisa, and he has a friend that's a Jew, or he knows the Jew. The shaila is, what's his kavanah? The sugyas of poel and workers and jobs and everything it will be a different sugya. But you're right. It might make enough kamina in all this. Okay, so just the chiluk we're saying now is a very important chiluk to keep in mind. It's a very big yisod. The chiluk between if in this yisod of ikar maisa, which is a heter, when the ikar maisa is for the goy or for himself or whatever, then that whole svara of ikar only applies where there's a situation of ner le'echa, ner le'mea. Because when there arises a situation of la fushe, if we could be adding for the sake of the Jew, then we no longer say ikar maisa, because there's a chelik of the maisa that's being done exclusively for the sake of the Jew. And you're able to separate out the maisa by the fact that you could be malakit more. You could like a subin. You can keep on digging it more and more subin. So part of that, part of the malacha of taking out a subin could end up being for the sake of the Jew. So you don't no longer look at the ikar by such a situation. And that's what Rashi also said at the end of that. Rashi in the Kuchah Bezon and Beis, there Rashi qualified that very clearly and said, "Aval nachri v'Yisrael v'amadlik atzma mishtamish Torah Vadai ikar adaiti didei avid. The came in near the mea shari. So Rashi is spelling out this svara of ikar. The ikar works when you say near the echad near the mea. So that's a very important yesod. Now getting back to the shaila we started off with, if Rava is masking to Abaya or not. So this is a tremendous machlokes harishonim. I'm not sure if we have such a raya from Rashi at this point, but the Rashba speaks out over here, the Hedya. The Rashba is clear as can be. On the Dir Maslo, Rav Amar, Afilu Tema B'fanav near Lech near Lamea, says the Rashba, Miu, Vadai Mode Labaya. The Kol Shalob B'fanav, Afilu Lafushe, B'Shul Yisrael, Shari. So he adds on even a big kiddush over here, that he's moted to Abaya, and saying a little bit not like we just said. He's saying that if it's Lob B'fanav, even Lafushe B'Shul Yisrael, it's mutter. Even if he does add on more, meaning we're matter it, according to Rashba, even when we're talking about something that does not have a svara of near lemea, even so, it's mutter when it's lo b'fanav. Behind the brisa, the goy should look at the seven lehemtoi. That we see from the brisa of that we say makiro. The brisa was talking about nachat shalikat asabin. So, and that is a case of shema yafush. It's not a case of ner lecha ner lemea. Even so, we said it's tali makiro, and makiro Abaya said means only b'fanav. So you just do the math, right? And it comes out that according to Abaya, it's mutter shelo b'fanav, even when it's things like a savim that have no svara of ner lecha ner lemea. And if Rav is masking to that, then that's a tremendous kula ala halacha. That shelo b'fanav is halacha l'maisa is mutter even by things like a savin, when it's lo b'fanav. U'makiro, if he is makir him, u'b'shlo b'fanav, nami shari, I know the okay, you needed a lick of lafushe b'shul Yisrael, and if something that there's no lafushe, like a ner and a kevesh, I feel the b'fanav shari behind the Rava. And that's that gufa is Rava's din. Rava's masking to Abaya that there's a tremendous kula shlo b'fanav. Whether it's an air or it's a savim with mutter, and he's all Rav is not being cholik on Abaya, he's being mosif on Abaya and saying that when it's the izos for of ner lecha ner lemea, then it's mutter even the fun of. Just only avali maso b'shvil Yisrael l'olam aser. I feel aso b'shvil Yisrael acherev aser. Then the Rashba goes on just to add on, but if Taka did it for the sake of Yisrael, then that takes over. And then at the end, the Rashba says, and then goes through the idea of rov. Rov was always machriya. How do you know who he's really doing it for? We go after the rov. And then the Rashba ends off, that's only if he didn't do it for himself. So the Sarach Atzmo, Afilu Hayosham, Kama Yisraelim Mutter. The La'olam Iker Daito Ene Ela La'atzmo. That's like a Yisoid Gadol. We'll see there's a bir halacha about this, barichos, that no matter what, we always go after the atzmo. The atzmo, the goy, he's there and he's being netted from it, that trumps everything. Like it's mucha from the Maisa of Shmuel, he says that, and that's what we see from Rashi over there as well. That although there might have been Kama Yisraelim and there's just one goy, the goy that he read the star, it shows that he had himself in mind, he always becomes the ikar. When it's something like ner lecha ner lemea, like by a ner or by a kevish. So that's the shita of the Rashba, and also other Rishonim as well. The Ran also spelled that out. Beis. Ran on the first Ran on the Gemara, of a makir asuk zera shami yarba b'shulo miu b'gemara muchach b'shalo lefan of shari. The Gemara shows from Abaya that shalo lefan is mutter. Now it's only in Abaya, but it says hilkach natinin v'sheinu makiro afilu b'fanav afilu b'midid ikalafushe b'shul Yisrael shari. The Ran says even a bigger chiddush. The Ran says tremendous chiddush that if it's not makiro, even b'fanav, even something that you could be a fushe, something like a savim, it's still mutter. I know Bryson and Nachash look at a savim emto. Makiro shelo b'fanav nami shari. If it's makiro and lo b'fanav, it's also mutter. And if it's something that's look at the fushe, then like ner and kevesh, a few makiro, a few b'fanav is all mutter. So the Ran and the Rashba are come out to be very, very mekel, that they're holding that Abaya is la halacha. Rav has just been mostly onto that and saying tremendous kulas that seems to be machlokas the Rashba and the Ran if it's makiro and lafushe b'fanav when it's lo makiro, when it's ena makiro. But they're both holding that a Rav is masking to Abaya, and therefore shelo b'fanav is always a heter. So that's the shita of the Ran and the Rashba. However, the Rambam, the Rif and the Rambam left out Abaya. All they mentioned was the svara of Makiro. They didn't say a word about B'fanav or Shelo B'fanav. Mashma that it's mashma from them. The Magen Mishnah has a suffix in the Rambam what he really means. Maybe somehow it's Nichlal and Makiro, the fact that it's B'fanav or not. But the Kesef Mishnah and Lecha Mishnah and the Beis Yosef all say that if the Rambam meant that, he wouldn't have left it out. It's a first memory of Abaya. Such a thing you can't leave out if you mean it. So they for sure don't. They're cholak on the Magen Mishnah suffix. It's clear from the Rambam that shelo b'fanav is not a heter. And Mela, the Rambam is holding that Rava is cholak on Abaya. You see like that from the Tur as well. Shin Chaf Hey Sif Yud Aleph. Liket dasavim l'tzarach behemtoi. Michael Achar of Yisrael. Im enu makiro, aber im makiro also. Lachem b'chol davar deikol lemechash shemu yarbe b'shilo, aber b'davar delekol lemechash shemu yarbe b'shilo kagon shehidlik ner la'atzmo shemu ner. So again, so the Torah just said if you malak a savim for the sake of a behema, the goy, then Yisrael can have it afterwards. Michael Achar Yisrael. If he's in a makiro, if it's makiro, it's also. The Torah didn't say a word about b'fanav or shelo b'fanav. So the Beis Yosef over here also has an arichos on this. He brings down that the Rif, the Rush, and the Rambam, all they wrote was Rava. They didn't mention Abaya at all. He brings the Magen Mishnah Suffolk and also the Ran and the Rashba that they all say that that Rava is masking to Abaya. Shelo b'fanav is a heter, but we have a very impressive list over here that's machmir, with namely the Rif, the Rush, the Rambam, and the Tur, all being machmir and saying that there is no heter of shelo b'fanav, that the Rava is called an Abaya. And the Beis Yosef says, like he says in the Kesef Mishnah, that in Isa, Li Nira, not like the Magen Mishnah, in Isa, the Rif, Rush, Rambam, have a Sabri Hachi, if they would have held this way, they wouldn't have left out the words of Abaya. The Vadai Shem, Farshim, the Rava, Polig al Abaya, they for sure understand that they're cholik. So and there is no heter on shelo b'fanav. So now the question becomes a very big question. According to all these Rishonim, which is the Psak of the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch also, which obviously the Beis Yosef wrote the Shulchan Aruch, he's holding that Rav Rishonim that the Klali Psak are that whenever the Klal of the Beis Yosef is throughout the whole Sefer of the Beis Yosef, if you have the Rif, Rosh, and the Rambam, we're all masking, then it doesn't matter who's cholik on them. That's the halacha. If those three are masking, then that's the halacha. So the Rif, the Rosh, and the Rambam all are masking that there's no heter of shelo b'fanav. It's also even shelo b'fanav. So now it comes that we have to clear what's the nukudas machlokas between these Rishonim over here, that according to the Rashba and the Ran, shelo b'fanav is mutter. It makes sense, right? It makes sense why shelo b'fanav is mutter. Like Rashi said, it's totally in kavana. If you have no kavana to make it us over here, so then this Maisa, if the definition of having kavana for it is that the Maisa, that you had to have the Jew there, since he's doing it partially, mainly for himself, but to add onto his kavana for himself, to say that it's additional kavana for the sake of the Yisrael, and he was in the Yisrael afish or gozer that he's mafish, he's adding on for the Yisrael. You need b'fanav. It's not a svara marasayin. It's a svara of like Rashi says, lachavin. If you're not b'fanav, you're not machavin for him. So then, why would we aser shelo b'fanav? What's the svara to aser? Is it a machlokas in whether we say, okay, that according to Rava, it's like a balabatzis machlokas, and we say, no, we have kavana even shelo b'fanav. So then they're not really talking to each other. Just one says yes, one says no. Abaye says it's only kavana when he's before you. Abaye says, Rava says, no, there's kavana even not before you. Is that the machlokas? It's very strange. It doesn't seem like there's a machlokas in the tzias over here of where do you say that there's kavana. So the Beis Yosef explains the svara of those Rishonim based on the Tosfos and Beitza that quotes a Tosefta. The case of Tosfos is that if a goy cooked for himself dag maliach, he took some, like they used to fry salty fish, like like herring. They would fry, and that was a very commonly eaten dish, and back in those days. And he did it for himself. So we aser that midasrina b'mayim shemila goy letzarcho shemishema yarba b'shelo. We're concerned that you might add on more for him. Now, how could that be? The goy did it totally for himself. And there was no Yisrael around. There was no Yisrael b'fanav when he did it. But still, you can't, if he brings it out, the Jew can't eat it because maybe he'll be marba b'shelo. How can you say such a thing? He did it totally for himself, and he wasn't around. So that Tosfos brings the Tosefta. The lashon Tosefta is mipnei shemar gilo the Shabbos haba. Because if the Jew would be nenen for what the goy did for himself, then maybe the next Shabbos, not that we're worried about this Maisa was done for the sake of Yisrael. Obviously, it was not. It was done. He did it totally for himself, and there was no Yisrael around. It was shelo b'fanav. But the Yisrael to be nana is, since she's makiro and is nana from it, then maybe he'll ask him the next Shabbos to do it. It's a whole new mahalach over here that we're not concerned about this particular Maisa, like we have been until now. Who is the kavanah for in this Maisa? Rather, we have a whole new chashash, Shemi Argilo, the Shabbos haba, which opens up a whole new world of chashashas, whole new world of Shabbos haba. And the Bir Halacha, I don't think I have it here with me. Let's see if I guess we'll get more involved in this when we see the Shulchan Aruch. We'll see the Bir Halacha, and we'll talk about it more. But the Bir Halacha also is a big arichos on this sif, and goes back and forth to see halacha ma'isa, can you be mekel or not, because of this tremendous shalom and rabbanon over here, tremendous machlokas. But and it would seem that when he brings a long list of Rishonim, the Bir Halacha brings a long list of Rishonim of other Rishonim that also agree with the Rashba and the Ran and the Maggid Mishnah that Rava is maskim to Abaye, and there is a heter shelo b'fanav, and we're not concerned with Shabbos haba. We only look at this Maisa, and this Maisa is going to be defined only by b'fanav. It's only if you talk about Shabbos haba and you say it's asur shelo b'fanav. In other words, everyone taka agrees. There's no achlokas about the kavana. Kavana is going to only be, like Rashi says, you only are mechaven for it for this Maisa if the Israel is before you, before the goy, in front of him. If he's not, then we're not worried about that. But and he brings a miri, and he brings other rishonim that agree to this tzad, which lahor that should be a tzad lahakel lahalacha l'maisa. But he ends off saying that we can't be mekel because Tosfos in Beitza and the Beis Yosef is stamach on that Tosfos goes with the Tosefta that we're worried about Shabbos haba, and Shabbos haba is going to be usher even if he's not b'fanav. That becomes the svara of all these rishonim, that why we worried about why is it usher even shalom b'fanav? Because we're not worried about the kavanah for this ma'aseh, we're worried about Shabbos haba, about future Shabbos, a whole different world, a whole different mahalach. So Mila says the Shar Tzion, the Bir Halacha, that you can't be mekel, we have to be machmer like Tosfos, which will be the hezber for the Rif, the Rambam, and the Rush. So I guess we'll hold that here because the Marma Kabbalah will be for this week, which is sent out, is going to be to go back to see Sif Yud and Sif Yud Aleph here in the tour of the Beis Yosef and the Nusach and the Magen Avraham, the Taz and everything, and we'll get more into this when you see the Bir Halacha inside, then that'll really spell this whole thing out. So we have a clarity in this machlokas, whether it's a hezber in the machlokas Rishonim, and really comes out to be a hezber in the machlokas Abaye and Rava. If there's a machlokas Abaye and Rava, then this will be, then according to what we're saying now, according to Tosfos, according to the Sefta, this will be the machlokas Abaye and Rava. What are they cholek? Abaye holds that there is a heter shelo b'fanav, and Rava says no, there's no heter shelo b'fanav. The machlokas is, what are we concerned about? Are we concerned about this Maisa that you're doing now? Or are concerned about future Shabbos? You might be margil him to do malacha on future Shabbos. If it's about this Maisa right now, then Rashi says, then look b'fanav and the nechabenle. For this Maisa, you need for the Jew to be there to be mechaben for him. Mashiach can, if we're worried about next Shabbos, so then as long as he's makira, he knows him, and he's netted from this, then we're worried that the Jew is going to ask him the following Shabbos to do it as well. So that's the Surah of Rava, and that's for the Hezbollah and the Sugya. Okay, Mitzvah Hashem, we'll talk more about this when we get into the Shulchan Aruch next week. Call to Hatzachah.